Today on CityCast Philly, city officials recently released the long-awaited findings of its Sixers Arena impact studies. The project has stalled for more than 2 years because there's just been so much controversy around it. I'm speaking with a community development reporter about the findings, the stakeholders involved, and what's next for this arena plan. It's Tuesday, September 3rd. I'm Trenae Nuri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Aaron Moselle, housing and community development reporter at WHYY's Plan Philly. Thanks for being back on the show.
Absolutely.
Aaron, it has been more than 2 years that we've all been waiting for these impact studies to come out. And when they did come out, I had mixed feelings. I felt like relieved and also like not completely satisfied because they were released on a late Monday evening. There's hundreds of pages. And this whole 76ers arena plan has been so controversial. Why has this issue, of all the issues in the city, but why has this issue been so polarizing?
So, this is largely controversial because of where developers want to put this. This would take over about a third of the existing Fashion District Mall in Center City, which is only steps away from Chinatown, a community that has routinely been asked to consider major development proposals. And in this particular case, the community feels very strongly that this development could destroy the neighborhood effectively over time by, increasing traffic and making, parking more difficult, hurting small businesses, and eventually raising property values over time if the development sort of spurs further development. And there's also just, tension between the Wells Fargo Center and this project. The Wells Fargo Center is owned by the Comcast Spectacor, and they would really like the Sixers to remain in South Philly in the Stadium District. And there are a lot of folks who feel like it makes the most sense for them, for all the teams and all the pro sports teams in Philly to stay in one spot instead of the Sixers striking out on their own. So those are a couple of the reasons why people are critical of this project. And there are likely more, but those are sort of the big ones.
So before we get into some of the findings of the impact studies, let's also start at the beginning. Can you remind us, what is the 76 Place plan?
Yeah, the plan is to build a brand new basketball arena at 10th and Market Streets, where the Fashion District Mall currently exists. The plan is to move into that arena in 2031. That's when the team's lease ends at the Wells Fargo Center in South Philly. And so all of this planning, all these impact studies, this is all in service of hitting that goal. They want to start vertical construction in 2028 and demolition, I believe, in 2026. And so at this point, the clock is really ticking for everything to kind of line up for that project to get started. And so this would mean that for the first time, if this is approved, that, you would have the Sixers in a separate arena and all the other sports teams in Philly down at the stadium complex. So it would fundamentally change kind of the way that people experience sports in Philly. The Sixers argue this is great for basketball, great for, the team attracting new talent, and have also argued economically that this project will really inject quite a bit of life into this Market East section, a section that has really struggled to thrive for decades.
All right. So there were 4 impact studies that were done. Why was this so important for the city to commission these studies, and who actually did all this research?
Yeah, these impact studies were announced under former Mayor Jim Kenney, and the goal was really to provide the public, but also, officials and stakeholders, a way of evaluating the value of building an arena. And so these studies were supposed to come out in December of last year, and then we were told they would come out early this year. And then they were suddenly dropped late one evening recently, about 8 months after the deadline. But this was the thing that everybody was waiting for to kind of really get down to the business of, do we want this arena or do we not? And they're really important because a lot of politicians and a lot of stakeholders have said we're going to base, our next steps on what is said in these studies, which were conducted by various consultants that were chosen to evaluate various aspects of the project, including the design, including traffic, including the economic impact, and what impact the project would have on the community, including Market East and Chinatown.
Gotcha. So the studies, like you mentioned, looked at different areas like community, economic, transportation impacts, as well as the design of the proposed arena. What were some of the key findings? You want to start with, I don't know, transportation?
Yeah, the transportation, the Sixers have predicated their proposal on the majority of fans arriving at the arena via public transportation, about 40%. And this study says, that is doable, but they need some work, but that is attainable. It also said that there was enough parking in the area. The Sixers are not, as part of this project, adding any parking. They're relying entirely on existing parking garages.
Really?
And that has been a point of contention. But this report, this impact report, found that there was sufficient parking in the vicinity of the arena to accommodate the demand from drivers. Just for some context, most folks who go down to the Wells Fargo Center, which is where the Sixers currently play, as we mentioned, most of them drive. And so, opponents say, this is just not realistic, expecting that most folks will not be driving to the arena when that's, currently the way things are.
And also mentioned in the impact study was like the congestion aspect as well.
That's right. When it comes to Chinatown, traffic congestion was pointed to as a reason that this could really negatively impact that community. And we can get into some of the details, but overall, the community impact study was pretty clear that this would be potentially very devastating to Chinatown, a 150-year-old ethnic enclave in the city that has been, staunchly opposed to this project from the start. And consultants concluded that this really does pose a threat to that neighborhood and its livelihood and its cultural identity.
Let's talk about what the consultants found in the economic impact.
Yeah, so the economic impact study showed that, this stadium would generate about, $2 billion in economic activity during its lifespan. And that would generate, approximately $400 million in new tax revenues to the city, the state, the school district. That's a lot lower than what the Sixers have been talking about this whole time. They've said that this project would generate about $1.5 billion dollars in new revenue. Now, if you talk to the Sixers, they say, well, the consultants who did that analysis, they use a different method than ours, and there's not really an ability to do an apples to apples comparison. But that will be something that certainly will be discussed in more detail as we move forward, because that's a big part of this project, right? Obviously, there's a basketball component, but more importantly, in terms of pitching this project to the city and city stakeholders and the community, it's about kind of what the impact would be. What's the value in dollars and cents of this project? And the Sixers have always said that this can really be an economic engine. It will inject a lot of life into an area that previously has not. And their argument is that, it would bring a lot of tax revenue to the city that otherwise wouldn't be there if the Sixers stayed in South Philly. So that will certainly be what a lot of folks are digging into in the coming weeks.
It was also interesting to see that in the study, it said that the Philadelphia region or the metro area could support multiple professional arenas. That was something that was different than what Comcast Spectacor had argued.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, as we mentioned, Comcast Spectacor would really prefer the Sixers to remain in South Philly. They think that makes the most sense for both the Sixers and for Comcast. And a big part of their argument has been that, this region really can't support two arenas, particularly when it comes to non-basketball programming, concerts and other events. The Sixers plan is very much relies upon having a lot of new events that have nothing to do with basketball. And this report concludes that there really is enough room, as you said, for two arenas, and that there's no problem there. That will also certainly be a point of contention as we go forward.
And lastly, the design aspect of this. What did consultants find in regards to that?
Yeah, overall, I mean, the headline is just that the consultants found that this was an appropriate use for that location, despite the opposition around it and the issues that people have with the project. They said that, there's nothing wrong with putting an arena at 10th and Market Streets from that perspective. They did have some critiques of the design itself, as some of which have come up previously in other areas, but overall, they thought that it was workable.
More on the Sixers arena plan after the break.
Hi, this is David, the CEO of CityCast. Do you ever find yourself holding back on travel because you're afraid of a language gap? Well, mind the gap no longer, as long as you have Babbel. Babbel is the science-backed language learning app. Its 10 minutes lessons are quick and handcrafted to get you talking your new language in 3 weeks. So I was reminded in the Olympics how much I love French. I had spoken French as a kid, but it has deteriorated to nothing. But I thought I would love to take a trip back to France with my girlfriend, but I'm embarrassed because my French is at 0. And I thought, why don't I get on Babbel and revive my French? And it's been a joy for the past few weeks. I'd forgotten everything. I'd forgotten plurals. I'd forgotten articles, vocabulary. Mostly I'd just forgotten how to speak and how to listen. And Babbel has me back on track with lots of speaking and lots of listening, because that's how you get better at a language. So I've been working on time, for example. And there's this way in French where when you say 2:45, you don't say 2:45, you say 3 o'clock minus 15. So, je rentre à 3h moins le quart. I'm coming back at 2:45. Anyway, it's so much fun to speak. And don't take my word for it. There's studies from Yale, from Michigan State University that prove that Babbel works. So here's a special limited time deal for CityCast listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/citycast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/citycast. Spelled BABBEL.com/citycast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Aaron, Chinatown, Market East, the Fashion District, the area that we've been talking about, wasn't the only location that was considered for this project. 2 years ago, Billy Penn reported that when this whole idea of the Sixers looking for a new home came out, there were surveys polling Philadelphians about potential locations like the Philadelphia Navy Yard, Camden, New Jersey, which is where the team currently has their practice facility and their corporate headquarters, and also the Fashion District. But then in July 2024, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy invited the Sixers to consider to move their arena across the bridge. And last month, there was a tweet from Delaware Governor John Carney, who wants the Sixers to move down to the first state. So there's other options here. Do we know if the Sixers are thinking about moving out of Center City or even Philadelphia?
To date, there's been zero indication that the Sixers are interested in abandoning their plan. I think if you would talk to David Edelman, who's part owner of the Sixers and sort of the face of this project, he would tell you that this is the plan and that's sort of it. They aren't entertaining the possibility of staying in South Philly. And they were, as far as I can tell, this is really, the location they want to be in, and certainly want to stay in Philly. Whether they're considering other locations behind the scenes is hard to say, but I recall talking to the Sixers at one point and was told that there is no plan B. So I think for all intents and purposes, the Fashion District location is what's on the table.
I think also a lot of eyes are on Council Member Mark Squilla, who represents this district. City Council is back in session on Thursday. Do we know if he's likely to approve or reject the Sixers arena proposal, given now that the impact studies are out?
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't taken a firm stance publicly. All along during this process, he has said that he sort of wants the legislative process to play out, which means that more than likely he will introduce legislation and let his colleagues and the public sort of decide in conjunction with Mayor Cherelle Parker's administration what kind of happens with this project. These impact studies will certainly inform those discussions, but I don't see a situation where Councilman Squilla simply does not introduce the legislation and they are not considered. In terms of the timing, it's unclear. He has vowed to make the legislation publicly available about 30 days before he would actually introduce it. And as you mentioned, these impact studies, there are hundreds of pages, and could be some time before all of that is digested and all the legislation is kind of ready to go. Although I should note that the legislation, some of it is being crafted currently. That process is already underway. So we could see ordinances introduced this fall potentially. But the Sixers are hoping that's the case because, as I said, their timeline is getting tighter.
Does Mayor Cherelle Parker support or oppose the arena development?
So Mayor Parker has yet to signal either way. She seems to be open to the project. And we should note that she received a lot of political support from the building trades, who are overwhelmingly supportive of this project. But yeah, we don't know officially kind of where she stands on this. And that should come out because, if she's not behind this project, that would really put a dent in the chances of it moving forward.
I do remember some weeks back or sometime during the summer, Mayor Parker said at a press conference that she wants the Sixers to stay in Philadelphia, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing I think that most people seem to be saying publicly, at least at this point, is that they would like the Sixers to stay in Philly. You mentioned that there have been offers from New Jersey and Delaware, but I think everyone would like the team to stay in the city. As far as location, we will see.
Also on Saturday, September 7th at 1 p.m., groups opposing the Sixers arena are expected to hold a demonstration at City Hall. So, Aaron, people aren't giving up this fight.
No, certainly not. I mean, and that's the Save Chinatown Coalition. And as we mentioned, Chinatown has been a community that has fought off major developments, has a history of that, is well versed in how to go about doing that or trying to do that. And so because they see this project as an existential threat to their community, they're going to keep their foot on the gas, starting with that rally.
All right. Bigger picture here, Aaron. Will these impact studies even matter to how council could vote on this arena project?
I guess it sort of depends on which council person you're talking to, but they certainly will inform that process, no question. Whether or not someone, takes it as gospel, whether or not they have some questions. I think the studies, at the very least, create a starting point for what will be an ongoing discussion that will take some time to complete. Councilman Squilla will introduce this legislation, all this enabling legislation. This will be multiple pieces of legislation, and those will be heard in public hearings. And so there's a whole process that needs to unfold, and these impact studies will inform all of that.
All right, that was Aaron Moselle, housing and community development reporter at WHYY's Play in Philly. Aaron, thank you so much for joining me today.
You got it.
You can read more of Erin's reporting in the link in our show notes. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. Let us know what you think of this ongoing 76ers arena saga. Tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to sign up for our morning newsletter, Hey Philly, to learn more about what else Philly's talking about. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.